Committee on Oversight and Government Reform will come to order. Without objection, the presiding member is authorized to declare recess at any time. We welcome you, Admiral. We have votes that are pending, so Mr. Cummings and I are going to try to get our opening statements in, and then we'll recognize you for yours, time allowing, and then we'll come back after votes. But welcome. The Transportation Security Administration is charged with an important mission, which is safeguarding the America's aviation system. TSA screens over 2 million passengers daily at over 430 airports. There is no margin for error, so consequently, their mission requires constant vigilance in an ever-evolving threat environment. To meet this demanding responsibility, TSA must run efficiently and effectively. It must directly address security threats. It must encourage open dialogue. It must foster a culture of leadership. And while Congress recognizes TSA is under relatively new leadership, and while we also acknowledge and recognize that doing your job effectively is not always, in the current environment, noteworthy. Those two facts notwithstanding, TSA in some instances has fallen short of the important mission that they have been afforded. In 2015, the committee received allegations of senior-level misconduct and whistleblower retaliation, and consequently launched an investigation. During the course of the investigation, the committee conducted 11 transcribed interviews, met and spoke with dozens of whistleblowers, and reviewed thousands of pages of documents. The committee held 5 public hearings, including today's. Yesterday, the committee released its investigative report and the result of findings. As detailed in the report, the committee's investigation discovered senior TSA officials engaged in patterns of misconduct, resulting in very minimal consequences. In December of 2014, TSA's Office of Inspection launched an investigation into Assistant Administrator Joseph Salvador. The complaint alleged Mr. Salvador committed misconduct by having an inappropriate relationship with a subordinate, misusing his official position during the hiring process, and lacking candor with investigators. Through its investigation, the Office of Inspection determined Salvador committed several acts of misconduct and recommended that he be fired. Despite the recommendation, TSA leadership chose not to terminate Salvador. In the same hour Salvador received OPR's notice of proposed removal, the Chief Counsel's office offered a settlement agreement, recommending, instead of dismissal, a 14-day suspension and a demotion with no loss in pay. Not surprisingly, Salvador accepted. The Department's Office of Inspector General discovered the same pattern. In their report, the OIG concluded TSA senior leaders deviated from standard policy and practice in a number of key respects, indicating that the Assistant Administrator received unusually favorable treatment in the resolution of his disciplinary matter. The committee also found senior TSA officials used involuntary directed reassignments as a means of retaliating against disfavored employees, including whistleblowers. Initially, directed reassignments, which relocate employees from airport to airport, were intended to improve the workforce and thereby security at airports. Senior officials at TSA headquarters, however, soon used them as a tool of reprisal to force whistleblowers or disfavored employees to relocate airports, often 100 miles away, and in some instances, several states away. In May of 2018, the Office of Special Counsel settled a set of these retaliation cases with TSA for $1 million. In this case, 3 TSA employees who raised operational issues at Honolulu Airport were relocated from Hawaii, where their homes and families lived, to mainland U.S. They were forced to report to their new assignment within just a few days. In a recent briefing, the committee learned TSA is considering implementing another initiative using directed reassignments to improve the TSA workforce. If that is indeed the case, TSA needs to reconsider. The last time TSA used directed reassignments, it became a tool to retaliate. And that is one of the reasons we're having the hearing today, to ensure mistakes of the past are not repeated. Throughout our investigation, the committee also faced obstruction which prolonged this investigation. And I'm just going to stop right now and repeat what I said earlier on. I recognize TSA is under new leadership, and most of what I am describing, if not all of what I am describing, did not take place under the Admiral's watch. Nonetheless, it was TSA then, too, And per our normal investigative practice, the committee requested documents from TSA. TSA refused to produce many of these documents. The committee then issued a subpoena to compel production of the documents, but under direction of the Department's Office of General Counsel, TSA refused to produce these documents. In January of 2018, we sent a letter to Secretary Nielsen requesting a transcribed interview with then DHS Acting General Counsel Maher and demanded the production of the subpoena documents. DHS and TSA refused to comply with either request. Finally, after the committee issued a subpoena 2 weeks ago, Mr. Maher agreed to appear before a transcribed interview. TSA, however, has yet to produce the documents. That is, to put it plainly, not going to be tolerated. As a result, our findings will be shared with leadership in the House and those responsible for appropriating money to the TSA. The documents requested relate to the underlying allegations in this investigation, which are misconduct and retaliation, and yet the Office of General Counsel withheld them on the basis of a thinly veiled, almost exclusively self-serving privilege that, oh, by the way, is also inapplicable to congressional investigations. The House of Representatives derives its authority from the U.S. Constitution and is bound only by the privileges derived therefrom. This committee does not, nor does the House of Representatives, recognize purported non-disclosure privileges associated with common law. That is true even when said privileges are relevant. That was not the case here. Here, TSA sought to rely on inapplicable privileges which are, in addition to not being recognized by Congress, inapplicable. It appears, at least to this member, TSA sought to withhold this information through DHS General Counsel from Congress because TSA simply believed it could. It is a responsibility of the House, and that includes all members, irrespective of political ideation, to thwart such intransigence. TSA needs to produce these documents to the committee in full. The problems laid out in the committee's report are not simply issues of the past. TSA officials involved in wrongdoing, in some instances, remain in senior positions today. A number of OSC whistleblower cases have yet to be resolved. TSA and DHS OGC continue to refuse to produce compelled documents and material facts to the committee. TSA must continue to improve its leadership accountability and its culture. As one whistleblower testified, TSA's problems are rooted in the areas of leadership and culture. Ours is a culture of misconduct, retaliation, lack of trust, cover-ups, and the refusal to hold its senior leaders accountable for poor judgment and malfeasance. And for the safety of our nation, TSA must do better. And I will say, based on my interactions with you, Admiral, I am confident that you're going to be able to provide the kind of leadership if you are given enough time to do so, which we'll get to that during the Q&A part, the term of service. Further to that, before I recognize Mr. Cummings, I'm not going to ask you any trick questions. I'm going to go last. I'm going to ask you about the budget. I'm going to ask you about equipment at the screening points. I'm going to ask you, to the extent you can discuss it publicly, about new emerging threats. I'm going to ask you about air marshals. I'm going to ask you about your budget and whether or not you could use more research sources. So I'm not going to try to trick you when it's my time to ask questions. I think that you are the right person to provide leadership, but I know that new leadership is needed. And what happened yesterday, when a committee of Congress sought information related to a really important investigation, is not going to be tolerated, and I think that is true on a bipartisan. For those who like bipartisanship, stay tuned after yesterday. With that, Mr. Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for calling today's hearing to examine the results of our bipartisan 3-year investigation of the Transportation Security Administration. This issue is very close to my heart because I helped launch this investigation together with our former chairman, Jason Chaffetz, in 2015, after the Inspector General of the Department of Homeland Security issued a troubling report on vulnerabilities in TSA's screening operations. Later that year, we expanded our investigation to examine problems with TSA's personnel management practices after we received reports that a senior official engaged in serious misconduct was recommended for removal. Instead of being fired, he was given a settlement that included only a 2-week suspension and no reduction in pay. Since then, we have sent many requests for documents, interviewed witnesses, and held hearings. However, our oversight efforts have been impaired significantly by the failure and outright refusal of the TSA and the Department to produce all the documents and witnesses we need to do our job. For that reason, I fully supported the subpoenas to hold those officials accountable. Now, let me make one thing very clear. I supported these oversight efforts regardless of who was in the White House under the administrations of both President Obama and President Trump. I did that because the security of the American people should not be a partisan issue. Today, I'm releasing a staff report that sets forth my conclusions and recommendations for how I believe we should move forward in this committee and in Congress. I ask unanimous consent that my report be made a part of the official record, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection.
Based on all of our work over the past 3 years, I believe we need urgent reforms in 3 key areas: security operations, personnel management, and transparency. First and foremost is security operations. When we started this investigation, we received troubling testimony from DHS Inspector General about serious vulnerabilities in TSA screening operations. Most recently, the Inspector General issued a report that warned of ongoing, and I quote, vulnerabilities with TSA's screener performance, screening equipment, and associated procedures, end of quote. He also issued a report concluding that the contribution of the Federal Air Marshal Service to aviation security is, quote, questionable, unquote. Based on our 3-year investigation, my recommendation is for Congress to demand sustained accountability from TSA on security measures. We need to press the agency to finally implement numerous unfulfilled security recommendations made by the Inspector General, GAO, and others that have languished, in some cases for years. I fully understand that many of these unfulfilled recommendations are classified, but I believe Congress needs to launch a 1-year oversight effort that is focused on ensuring that TSA takes the steps it needs to take and to resolve to numerous vulnerabilities in its security operations. Second, on personnel practices, we have identified many examples of arbitrary and unfair actions against both managers and security officers. We have also found several instances of retaliation against whistleblowers who report security deficiencies. The problem is that TSA employees have fewer protections against these kinds of abuses than any other federal employees. There's a much higher bar for TSA employees to clear, although they have been doing so. In fact, just 2 weeks ago, I attended an event to honor 3 TSA whistleblowers who received the Public Servants of the Year Award from the Office of Special Counsel. My second recommendation is for Congress to consider legislative proposals to strengthen civil service protections to protect whistleblowers from retaliation and protect employees against arbitrary personnel actions. Third is the absolutely critical need for greater transparency. Both TSA and the Department repeatedly refuse to cooperate with our investigation. They refuse to provide documents we subpoenaed a year and a half ago, including documents about the same whistleblowers who received those awards. They also withheld documents from the Office of Special Counsel, and it took an act of Congress, literally, to make sure that they got them. Just yesterday, our staff was finally able to speak with the senior attorney at the department who was involved with many of these troubling decisions. The department refused to produce him voluntarily, so we had to subpoena him for a deposition. So my third and final recommendation is for Congress to consider legislation to significantly enhance transparency at TSA, transparency about whistleblower claims, about settlement agreements, and about non-disclosure agreements employees are forced to sign. As I close, let me say this. I do not know who will control Congress next year, but based on the results of our 3-year investigation, I believe that we must do everything in our power to produce and redouble our efforts with regard to while we're moving to implement concrete reforms. With that, let me welcome the Administrator. I want to thank you, Mr. Administrator, for being here. I want to thank the Chairman for cooperating with us and working truly in a bipartisan way to get the subpoenas out and to move this investigation along. And he's absolutely right. This is a bipartisan effort. And of course, I knew you when I was chairman of the subcommittee on Coast Guard, and I know the type of man you are, and I know you're a man of your word. And so I look forward to working with you, and I look forward to hearing from you. And with that, I yield back.
They called votes, so we're going to recess to go vote, and then we'll come back and got all the guys that are here in the queue ready to go. So as soon as Ms. Cummings and I get back, we'll recognize you for your opening. Committee will come to order. Thank you for your patience during that vote series. With that, we are pleased to introduce our witness, the Honorable David Pekoski, Administrator of the Transportation Security Administration. Welcome. Pursuant to committee rules, all witnesses will be sworn in before they testify, so I would ask you to please stand and raise your right hand. You solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give should be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God. The witness answered in the affirmative. There's a series of lights that indicate where you are. I'm sure you're familiar with that, and with that, we would recognize you for your 5-minute opening statement.
Chairman Gowdy, Ranking Member Cummings, and distinguished members of this committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you this afternoon. As this is my first appearance before this committee, and some of you don't know me, let me open with a pledge to be responsive to the committee's oversight and to your recommendations for TSA. Additionally, given the nature of the topics we will discuss today and the seriousness of the issues, I would be happy to meet with any member on any matter. And I further offer to meet with the committee staff in the future if you would find that helpful. As you know, sir, I have just finished my first year as the administrator. And in this first year, I have devoted the majority of my time to be at the front line of TSA, where the vast majority of our employees work. In this first year, we have published a strategy and an administrator's intent to continue maturing a relatively young agency. I want to develop a culture in TSA that is free of retaliation, that values employee input, and results in a very positive working environment with high employee morale. This is so critical to our long-term success in protecting the nation's transportation systems and being good stewards of taxpayer dollars. I think we have addressed current discipline issues well over the past year. This is a positive beginning and is reflected in data on discipline and whistleblower cases. And it is reflected in the just-released FEVS, or Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey, scores for TSA. These scores are the highest in TSA history, and they reflect improvement in every single Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey category. At the same time, we must reflect on and learn from the past. I have read the majority and Democratic staff reports that you released yesterday afternoon, and will study them further in the days ahead, as will all of TSA's senior leadership. Simply put, I am deeply troubled by what I read. All of the individual cases described in your reports occurred before I became the administrator, and I assure you the outcomes of some would be different today than what they were a few years ago. However, where misconduct has occurred and the matter is closed, I respect the finality of those decisions, even if I would have handled them differently. You will find, I hope, that I will be very responsive to your work, and importantly, that I will continue to improve TSA culture and processes to ensure we don't repeat the mistakes of the past, and that the change is enduring. And I think that's one of the critical values that I can add as the administrator, is to ensure that whatever changes we put in place are memorialized and become part of the institutional fabric of TSA, so that TSA truly does continue to learn as an organization. I would also state that I had the privilege of following a very good friend of mine, Administrator Peter Neffinger, into this position. And the position I have taken since I have been the administrator was to build on the very solid foundation Administrator Neffinger left for me, and so I hope to do that for whomever succeeds me. I would also note that several months ago I met with several whistleblowers to hear their stories firsthand. I told them I valued their input, and I will work hard to rid TSA of any behavior that smacks of retaliation, that their experience will have a beneficial impact on TSA. In my career in the public and private sectors, I have always championed equality of treatment, fundamental fairness, transparency, strong leadership, and accountability. I am accountable to you, to the American people, to the Secretary, and very importantly, to the TSA workforce. And yes, I am accountable to my workforce, and it is a privilege to hold the position I am in today. I have personally interacted with thousands and thousands of TSA employees in my first year, in locations all around the country and indeed all around the globe. They are, with rare exception, outstanding public servants. They're professional, committed, and they truly are great representatives of America to the millions of travelers we protect each and every day. I am proud of them and grateful for the work they do, as I know all of you are as well. I want the American people to know that despite some of the difficult challenges we will discuss today, the vast majority of the men and women of TSA are dedicated, hardworking, and honorable individuals. Just this morning, for example, we had an example of their service. One of our lead officers at Milwaukee Airport, named Tony D'Amico, rushed to the aid of a traveler who was having a heart attack in the security checkpoint, likely saving that passenger's life. Tony is a great example of the TSA workforce. You know, in TSA, right after 9/11, TSA adopted a slogan that said, "Not on my watch," reflecting that a repeat of 9/11 would not occur on the watch of any individual TSA man or woman. We changed that slogan very slightly over the past year to say, "Not on our watch." And what that stands for is that while we're on watch in this agency, we will do everything we can to prevent another terrorist incident from occurring in our transportation system. That slogan also applies to retaliation against whistleblowers in cases of misconduct. I want everybody in TSA to say that won't happen on our watch, and we do this together. In closing, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Cummings, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you this afternoon, and I look forward to responding to your questions. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
I have a few questions for you. First of all, you know, in the past, the committee's findings at TSA did indicate that whistleblowers were punished. Can you just give me your general overall reaction to that?
I'm sorry, sir, I didn't get the whole question.
What is your response to the fact, or how do you feel about whistleblowers being retaliated against?
Oh, I think well, first off, it's against the law. And secondly, I just think that's completely unacceptable behavior. And one of the things that I have tried very hard since I've been the administrator is to ensure that each and every employee in TSA knows that I want their input. They're the ones that do the job of the agency day in and day out. They see passengers. They provide the security service directly. I want their input, and I want to be responsive to their input.
Okay, in the past there have been retaliations. I realize it was before you got there. Has anything happened to the people who retaliated against the whistleblowers? I mean, is there something that you can point to that you can say, this guy did this manager did this, and they're out of here?
Yes, sir. Well, you know, of course, whenever there, and again, this hasn't happened since I've been the administrator, right. But should an employee retaliate against someone else, that would absolutely be reflected in their performance evaluations, and if we considered it serious enough, it would be subject to disciplinary action.
But, I mean, has that happened in the past, where if I'm one of these guys who retaliates, I know that people are going to come down on me, either your predecessor or you? And I realize you're new up there, although you can still maybe take action against people who did this in the past. Are there things that you can point to that is going to scare people out of this behavior?
I would point to their performance evaluations, although I can't give you a specific example, sir, of a performance evaluation, just because I don't have knowledge of that. But I would certainly expect that performance evaluations and disciplinary action would be an appropriate remedy.
Okay, but right now, as of today's date, you cannot think of one example where you can say, this guy was at fault for coming after a whistleblower and he lost his job or something.
Not to my direct knowledge.
Okay. One of the ways they punish people was by reassigning people to a different office hundreds of miles away. Will this ever happen again, or are you doing anything to make sure? I mean, it kind of surprised me to even have the ability to do that, you know, transfer somebody from, I don't know, Cleveland to Miami or something. Will that ever happen again, and are you doing things to even make sure that such long-distance reassignments don't happen? Yes,
sir. First off, to my knowledge, there has not been an involuntary directed reassignment in TSA since 2015. That policy was put in place, and we have further strengthened that policy. Additionally, I have prohibited the use of involuntary directed reassignments for punitive measures. Now, I would say that on occasion we will reassign employees based on the needs of the agency, but there are many things we consider in that process. We consider first, the needs of the agency, second, the cost of that reassignment, and third, the needs of the individual. And there is a very robust process now, sir, that has oversight for all of those reassignment decisions, so that we have visibility of what decisions are being made and can intervene if need be. But there are no more involuntary directed reassignments for punitive measures.
Okay. Now, there was a survey that I'm sure you're aware of saying that only 47% of your employees felt they could go to someone and say, you know, something's wrong. There's a little scandal in this thing, by the way. You rank 332nd out of 336 agencies. The scandal is we have 336 agencies. But that's not what we can deal with today. Given your ranking here, which is just almost beyond belief, what are you doing other than training sessions to make sure that agencies feel comfortable coming forth to supervisors?
A couple things to comment on first, sir, is first and foremost, when I mentioned the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey, the trend in those surveys has been consistently positive for the last couple of years. So that means that whatever it is we're doing, and I'll get to that in just a second, is having a positive effect. Additionally, the best places to work survey questions that go out to agencies every year, we have the results of those survey questions for 2018, and in every question category, we see an improvement year over year.
Okay, well, we've only had one since this one. In 2017, it was 47%. If you have inside information, what is it for 2018?
For 2018, it is, I can tell you that in the category, for example, in the FEV survey under Leaders Lead, in 2017 it was 40, in 2017 it was 40%, in 2018 it's 44. Under Supervisors Lead, it was 68 in 17, 70% in 2018. So supervisor, that's a pretty good score. And then in the intrinsic work experience went from 60% to 62%. So there
some of those things I still a great deal concerned. If you're at 62%, that means 38% of the employees are afraid to say something's wrong here for fear they're going to be in trouble. That's a lot of people.
Gentleman's time has expired, but you may answer the question. Gentleman from Wisconsin.
Yeah, I think what's really important, though, again, is the trend. And what I would like to see, sir, and I'm working very hard to do this, is to see that trend rather than going linearly up, starts to take a more steep slope to see improvement. I think we're at the position where we'll see that in the next couple of years, I hope.
Thanks for coming over.
Thank you.
Gentleman from Maryland to recognize.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. 2 weeks ago, Administrator, I attended an awards ceremony to honor 3 TSA employees who have now been named Public Servants of the Year. Here's a photo of Charlene Mata, Heather Callahan, Chuck, and F. Michael Abreu. They reported security concerns at the airport where they worked. But rather than addressing their security concerns, senior managers at TSA retaliated against these employees, employing a practice known within TSA as directed reassignment. TSA moved them to new duty stations at different airports. They forced them to move their families hundreds of miles away. And eventually, TSA paid nearly $1 million to settle these whistleblower claims with regard to retaliation. Now, I must give you credit, Mr. Administrator, that I know that you were involved with that settlement. And I thank you for doing that. Because so often, people who go through these kinds of things are unseen, unnoticed, unappreciated, and unapplauded. But you backed us up in a way, the members of this committee, who believe very strongly in all of us in protecting our whistleblowers. Now, Administrator, do you agree with former Special Counsel Lerner when she talks about the fact that she wanted to make sure, she said, I think that the full protections of Title V applying to TSA would be very helpful so that there's a more of a feeling of fairness in employment actions so that hiring decisions and promotion decisions are perceived as fair. Would you agree with that?
Sir, under the Aviation and Transportation Security Act, the Administrator has broad authority to manage the personnel within TSA. All of the authority I need is already in ATSA to do the things that you described, and we are taking steps to be able to do that. One of the things that I mentioned in my opening statement was the conversations I've had with the TSA workforce since I've been the Administrator, and I've gotten a lot of good feedback from them on the things that concern them. I've also met with the American Federation of Government Employees, the Council 100, that represents TSA employees twice now. So I understand their perspective, and we will make significant movement in that regard. Final thing I'd add, sir, is that the Whistleblower Protection Act applies to TSA equally. Even though we're not under Title V, that act applies to TSA employees, as does the Enhancement Act. So I will do whatever I can to ensure that we provide as impartial a personnel review system as we possibly can. That's on my agenda for this fall.
Very good. I want to talk for a minute about the Transportation Security Officers, or TSOs. Those individuals who work on the front lines to screen passengers, baggage, and cargo at our airports, yet are not covered by many of the civil service protections that apply to most other federal employees. In fact, they have far fewer protections than managers do. A recent GAO report found that while TSA and Customs and Border Protection Agency had roughly the same number of employees, TSA had more than double the number of misconduct cases that CBP had in fiscal year 2016. GAO also found that between 2014 and 2016, the number of TSA employees declined, but the number of misconduct cases grew from more than 13,000 to more than 17,000. Administrator, do you have any insight into why these trends have occurred?
And Mr. Cummings, with respect to the data, the 45,000 misconduct cases, part of the reason that number is so high, and I think that number is unacceptably high, let me first state that, is that the way we measured it was a little bit different than the other agencies. So it's not necessarily an apples-to-apples comparison. But what we found when we looked at that data was that we were using misconduct for what were really performance issues. And so what we've done is we've come out with some direction as to how we separate for our employees what's a performance issue versus a misconduct issue, and to not try to use the misconduct avenue when there's truly a performance issue at play. The other thing, sir, that is very important to me, it's in my leadership principles, is I want to move TSA away from a discipline-focused organization where if somebody does something wrong, the first thing we think about is disciplining them, and rather move to a more of a coaching and a mentoring system. My experience with our employees is they want to do a good job. They just sometimes need some extra help in being able to perform, and we should be more coaching and mentoring in that regard.
Well, I see my time has run out, but let me just say this, and the Chairman has been very good at this. I think every hearing that we've had, I've heard him say these words, and I agree. I've had good experiences with the TSA employees at the airports, but as I've told you, that when this committee was addressing the issue of the Secret Service, I had become convinced that they had been lulled into a culture of complacency. And because of the repetition of this job, I think we got to make. I'm just curious, and perhaps you can answer somebody else's question. How do we keep their morale up? I saw where we were almost at the bottom, as far as places where people, good places to work. We were like 360, and the bottom was 363. So we close, just scraping that bottom, and so. That's not something that you or none of us would be proud of. But more importantly, we want to make sure that our constituents are treated right, and that they're able to have confidence that when they're being checked, that it's needed, and that we want them to make sure that they're treated in a courteous way. Like I said, I'm a member of Congress. I always get good treatment, but I don't know about all my constituents. Okay.
Yes, sir. And what we've done in that regard is we have changed our core values as an agency. Our core values now are integrity, respect, and commitment. Respect being a very critical part of that. Respect for each other in the workplace. Respect for the Constitution, the rule of law, privacy rights, and importantly, respect for our passengers. The other thing that I've been working very, very hard on is to make sure that we introduce the technology tools that our officers need to be able to perform their mission. When I look at the IG reports and our own covert testing, a lot of the solution there involves technology, and so I've been very hard at work in doing that, and have gotten great support out of the U.S. Congress in that regard. The other thing, sir, is that within ATSA, I have the ability to set pay for the workforce, and ATSA gives me the authority to provide what's called in-band increases every year, which is different than Title V General Schedule, which is every 2 or every 3. Unfortunately, we haven't used that authority, and that's something that I'm exploring actively at this point in time. There's also, of course, a financial component to that. But you know, one of the problems we have in TSA right now, particularly at the entry level of the first 2 or 3 pay bands, is that most employees are at the very low end of the pay band. There should be a bell curve there. It shouldn't be everybody at the bottom of the pay band. And so I'm going to work very hard to see if we can't remedy that, at least start moving in a direction, but it is going to require financial resources.
The gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pekoski, we had hearings about mistreatment of TSA employees before this, in this committee before. And first of all, I want to say that I've gotten to know the TSA employees at the Birmingham airport, and I think they're outstanding. They do a great job. My concern is that we've had this issue of whistleblowers, and as the gentleman from Maryland just pointed out, the retaliation against them. Have you individually met with any of the whistleblowers who testified for the Committee on Retaliation at TSA?
Yes, sir. I met with a whole series of whistleblowers a couple months after I came into the position. Very good conversations with each of them. A couple things that came out in those conversations, no surprise to any of us in this room. First and foremost is they had good ideas that we should have listened to. And I really want and I encourage every single employee in TSA, if you have a better way to do our mission or a suggestion as to how we can improve, to please voice it. But we've got to welcome those voices when they're raised. The other thing that the whistleblowers said was that they are totally dedicated to the TSA mission, even after all they went through with respect to retaliation. That speaks volumes to me, to their character. And one of the things that I reflected back to my senior executives after I had those meetings was the fact that we do need to do everything we can to make sure that whistleblowers feel that they can come forward and not be in the category of whistleblowers, but just employees that have a better way of doing something and that we seriously consider it. Additionally, sir, we've trained about 7,000 or 8,000 people in the past year just on whistleblower protection, because I want that word to go out. This is serious business. We do not retaliate. And in fact, we should do something completely different. We should welcome that input into our work.
Let me interrupt you and ask you, how, in this training that you're doing, how much of that includes the recommendations made by the people who have been punished for being whistleblowers?
It incorporates largely everything they said.
All of the ideas that they brought to you?
Yes, sir. And the point of the training was just to make sure that the workforce knew that, hey, if somebody has an idea and they have a better way of doing business, you can't retaliate against them if you think it threatens your position or threatens decisions that you made. You just simply can't do that. And so we wanted to raise the awareness. And we also wanted to raise the awareness for the workforce that if you feel you've been subject to retaliation, there's an easy way to report it.
Well, what concerns me a little bit here is that the Deputy Administrator, Patricia Cogswell, recently informed committee staff that TSA is considering issuing directed reassignments to FSDs as part of its reorganization plans. Are you making sure that in this reorganization plan that none of these reassignments are punitive?
A couple things on the reorganization, sir. First off, no decisions have been taken with respect to that reorganization. I get briefed at the end of this week, but the process we used has been completely open and transparent, and every single senior member of the security organization that runs the security in the airports has been involved every step of the way as to what's going on.
I appreciate that, but what I'm really wanting to know is are you taking proactive steps to make sure that people who have been mistreated are not mistreated in this reorganization plan?
Yes, sir. We will do no punitive involuntary reassignments, and that's something that we.
Do you allow the employees who are being redirected to have an opportunity to speak or to request other assignments?
Yes, sir. And we may need to relocate some employees. I don't know what we're going to approve yet because I haven't seen the plan. But certainly, I want to maintain the management flexibility to put the resources in the right location. But I can assure you that we will have a conversation and a good one with each employee that might be affected.
Well, let me ask you this in the time that I have remaining. In March of last year, the committee requested documents pertaining to the whistleblower cases that had been withheld from the Office of Special Counsel, and TSA and DHS and OGC still refused to produce those documents in defiance of a congressional subpoena. In my time on the Oversight Committee, that's been one of the most frustrating things that we've had to deal with, is the failure of various agencies to respond appropriately to a subpoena. And I want to know why these documents are still being withheld from Congress, and what you're going to do about making sure we get them.
So we provided all the unredacted documents that the Office of Special Counsel requested based on the law that was passed by Congress in December of last year. With respect to the Congress, I follow executive branch guidance, but I pledge to you that I will do everything I can to accommodate as much as I can within executive branch guidance, but I need to follow the guidance within the executive branch.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I have one more question. I was sitting in on the deposition yesterday with the Principal Deputy General Counsel, Joseph Mayer, and despite a bipartisan request, DHS refused to provide the committee with emails a Federal Security Director sent to his son pertaining to a whistleblower retaliation case on the grounds of attorney-client privilege. Do you think this is reasonable? How can we exercise oversight and really resolve this situation if we're going to have to continue to play
Yes, sir.
these kind of games?
And having a conversation like you did yesterday with the department is I'm going to take my guidance from the department with respect to what information I'm allowed to release. But like I said, I can assure you that I will do everything I can within that guidance to ensure the committee is informed.
Well, you're supposed to comply with all the laws and regulations, including the Office of Special Counsel's Reauthorization Act, and thus far, as far as I can tell, you've not produced the documents requested by OSC until the December law required it. And I just, when you delayed for months and months and months, I have a hard time seeing that as cooperative. That, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for your indulgence, and I yield back.
Yeah, and yes, sir, if I could, and I understand your frustration, we did provide all the documents that OSC requested once the law was in place.
Yeah, once the law was in place, but when the committee asked for it, I think that you need to provide those documents in a more timely manner.
Sir.
Gentlelady from the Virgin Islands, Ms. Plaskett, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, sir, for being here. With respect to my colleagues' questions just a moment ago about those documents and the request for that. So it's your position that you're following the executive branch's guidance. And if that guidance is counter to what your counsel is giving you, then what is your position with respect to us receiving documentation?
Well, the guidance, ma'am, that my counsel is giving me should be absolutely consistent with what the DHS guidance is. In fact, the General Counsel is the direct supervisor of the Chief Counsel in TSA by our organizational structure.
And then, so if that guidance leads your counsel to refuse to give this committee what it believes under our oversight laws we're allowed to receive, then you'll follow that guidance, correct? Of your counsel?
Yes, ma'am.
Which would then probably lead to this committee having to do what it has done in the past, which is then issue a lawsuit under FISA or FOIA requests, which seems to me to be really counterproductive to the work of what Congress is supposed to be. Do you see a way for us to work through that without having to go to that extreme?
Ma'am, what we've done, particularly with with respect to the latest request from this committee, is we've tried to find every accommodation we possibly could. A recent example of that is, we were doing cameras side by sides in TSA headquarters with the redacted and unredacted version of documents. The committee staff had asked for more of a paper version that would still be at TSA headquarters, but to be able to use a paper copy to make it more expeditious, because it is hard to look at a screen and compare differences. And so I will find every way I can.
Unless you're a teenager who's used to just looking at the screen and not paper, right?
Right.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is the conversation that you and I had before the hearing started, and thank you for reminding me about our last encounter personally with each other, which was immediately after the storms in the Virgin Islands. But one of the things I wanted to talk with you about is an attempt my office is making to act as an intermediary between the local government and TSA and Customs and Border Protection. I've had conversations, my staff has had conversations with numerous people in both of those agencies, as well as me speaking with Secretary Nielsen during her last visit to St. Croix in the beginning of August, in which we have found that we had screening. So in the Virgin Islands, we have a lot of individuals who come in from the Eastern Caribbean, and we try to segregate those individuals from American citizens and others coming from domestic flights. Because we're outside of the customs zone, people have to be screened separately. Screening material equipment was taken out of the St. Thomas office, out of the St. Thomas airport, and we still have equipment on the St. Croix airport, but we've been told that that is scheduled to leave as well. And I know that there has been some meetings between the local government, Customs and Border Protection, and TSA. The resolution that they came up with, meaning the federal agencies, is not satisfactory to our partner airlines that are bringing people in. We're not in a position at this time to purchase equipment on our own, nor can we afford to lose our traffic coming from the Eastern Caribbean. These are individuals who are not coming just for tourism. They're coming to use our hospitals, our other types of facilities. These are serious revenues that are coming into the Virgin Islands. And I have told you personally that I find it very frustrating that I cannot get TSA to agree to a meeting with the local officials, my office, and Customs and Border Protection. It's frustrating at the most basic level, but more personally, I find it very disrespectful that a member of this committee in particular, a member who has gone through what we have gone through in the Virgin Islands, cannot get TSA to agree to sit down and have a meeting, and continually between Customs and Border and TSA, pointing the finger to each other as being responsible. I'm glad that you've committed that you're going to have someone from your office have a facilitated discussion so that we can come to a resolution that we don't continue to lose air traffic into the Virgin Islands.
Yes, ma'am, and we will certainly have somebody from TSA at that meeting, and then I'll personally follow up.
And that will be sooner rather than later, correct?
As soon as you want.
Okay.
And then I'll personally follow up with you on that issue after that meeting is over. I would also just like to add briefly that I saw your leadership in action following Hurricane Irma in St. Thomas, and I really credit you for that. And thank you.
Thank you so much. I yield back.
The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Gowdy. My first question, whistleblowers have alleged that some previous TSA leaders prioritized wait times at screening checkpoints at the expense of security. In 2015, TSA implemented changes to its screening procedures to reemphasize security over security. Have you continued this approach?
Yes, sir. First thing I said when I got into the job is our main job is security effectiveness, and it wasn't the job of our officers to worry about wait times. It was the job of management.
Okay. What would you say to TSA employees in the field to reaffirm that security is their first priority?
I say it every time I have an opportunity to talk to my workforce, and I put it out in documents. That is the most important thing we do. It makes no sense to have a lot of people moving through a security line very quickly with bad security.
the House recently passed a bill requiring TSA to only allow members of trusted traveler programs to use pre-check lanes. If this legislation becomes law, is TSA prepared to implement it without any delay?
We have had extensive discussions with our Oversight Subcommittee, Chairman Katko, and we are prepared to start prototyping that actually in the next 6 months or so, just to see how it works and to make sure we have the right procedures in place. And I would add, sir, that this will improve security. It will add security.
What type of turnover does TSA have? Is your labor situation, do you have challenges finding TSA workers and retaining them, or is it pretty stable?
Yes, sir. I think the attrition rate, the rate at which we lose people, is still way too high. It's a little bit below 20%, but that's still way too high, and that drives a lot of cost. Cost of recruiting, cost of training new employees, and it also has a security effect because you've got the experience that's just not continuing to be built up. So that's a big concern of mine. And the other thing I would just add is that the economy is doing very well in this country, which is a great thing. But it challenges us sometimes, given the wages that we pay for entry-level people to attract them in some markets around the country. So within the Aviation and Transportation Security Act, I have the ability to put in pay incentives in there, and I have done that, but that comes at some financial cost.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman from Kentucky yields back. The gentlelady from Michigan is recognized, Ms. Lawrence.
Thank you. At this committee hearing in March 2017, the former DHS Inspector General Roth testified that arbitrary personnel practices can have a chilling effect on whistleblowers who might otherwise speak out about security deficiencies. At that hearing, I asked the Inspector General, quote, if TSA employees are reluctant to raise the security deficiencies they observe, couldn't that put aviation security at risk? And Inspector General Roth answered, and I quote, well, that's absolutely the case. So, Administrator, do you agree with Inspector General Roth, and can arbitrary personnel practices chill whistleblowers and put aviation security at risk?
I completely agree with him, and it can absolutely put aviation security at risk. That's why I'm so focused on it.
So would you agree with me that it is critical that this nation's security, for our nation's security, that the TSA have a personnel system in place that protects whistleblowers from retaliation and protect employees from arbitrary personnel decisions?
We have the authority already in law, ma'am, and it is against the law in TSA as it is in any other agency to retaliate against whistleblowers. Additionally, we do not do punitive involuntary reassignments at all.
So I want you to know that we've had, like I said, previous hearings about this. The concern and the concern for having a strong TSA workforce with integrity and the protections for their job is a critical element of our security. And I appreciate you being here and agreeing. So when you lead, I expect for you to continue your commitment you're making here today. Because if there are some discrepancies or deficiencies, how are we ever going to get better if we don't have a environment where we are nurturing that fact of us all being on one team? And I just wanted to congratulate you on something else you said, that we need to mentor and teach instead of beating up or disciplining every employee. I thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Iowa is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Gowdy. Good to see you, my friend. A couple questions here for you. Have you individually met with any of the whistleblowers who testified before the Committee on Retaliation at TSA in 2016?
I don't have the list of those that testify, but I have individually met with whistleblowers. In fact, it was at my initiative that we have those meetings. And so I met with several whistleblowers several months ago just to have a dialogue with them, see how they were doing, what their experience was, so that I could, to the extent—
What was their experience?
Their experience was one of great frustration, as I completely empathize with. I mean, they thought they were offering up good ideas, and they got stymied by the organization almost every step of the way.
But not retaliated against.
Well, the folks that I talk to, I think in every conversation there's always a feeling of some level of retaliation. And what I want to make sure we do is that not only do we not retaliate, I don't think that's enough, personally. I think we should welcome different perspectives and importantly, give our employees feedback as to what we think, because not every idea is something that we can implement, but to have that dialogue.
I'm from the private sector, and culture in companies is important. It tells you a lot.
Right.
What's the culture at TSA?
The culture is something I am totally focused on. In fact, when I publish the strategy, when I publish the administrator's intent, if you read those, it's a guidance to the culture that I want to develop within TSA, and based on input I've received from a lot of people.
What is that culture? What are you trying to develop?
I'm trying to develop a culture where we all work together, where we support each other, where different points of view are respected, and we lift each other up and we care for our people. And I want a culture where people look at their employment in TSA and say, hey, I can't wait to get to work today.
And that culture starts at the top.
It does.
What do you personally do to make sure that that culture starts at the top?
Yes, sir. What I personally do is, one, I talk about it a lot, and every time I visit TSA men and women almost every single week, sometimes multiple times a week. In fact, I've just gotten back from like a 2.5-week trip throughout TSA, and I want to have that engagement with our employees so I can reinforce those messages, and also, very importantly, get a sense for how it's going out there. And when I meet with employees, I don't just meet with them in a big group. I walk around the checkpoint and I talk with people person to person, because it's only during those encounters, really, that you're going to get some feedback that's of particular value. And so I want to ensure that I don't lose touch with the workforce, and I also want the workforce to know that I work for them. You know, my job is to make sure that they have
servant leadership.
Yes, absolutely. That they have the tools and the direction and the support, and importantly, when something happens that lands a transportation security officer or a federal air marshal in the news, if they followed our procedures, I need to be right behind them and be out in front, and we have done that. So, I think that's a very strong message, and that's certainly what I'll continue. I've done it for, this has been the way I've worked for 40 years.
How would you say the morale is?
I would say the morale actually is not what the public perceives it is. If you read reports and things like that, you think, wow, the morale must be really terrible. I don't see it as being really terrible. I think we can make some improvements, and I think that we just need to have a concerted leadership effort to do that. But I also—
Why is the perception not good then?
Because in a lot of ways, I'll give you an example. On the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey, yes, we score more towards the bottom than on the top, but it's important that everybody recognize we're improving. And in fact, if you look just inside the DHS components, we're actually improving quite well compared to our other DHS partners. And we all want to move as far forward as we possibly can. But the story that doesn't get out is the positive things that are going on. And that's a large part of what I try to do.
Get that story out.
Absolutely.
Get it out.
Yes.
Are you trying to do that?
I am. In fact, in my
perception,
right.
In Marketing 101,
right.
Perception is reality.
Yes. Right. And so every chance I get, I speak to that. I did it today in the opening statement. Every chance I get to address the media, and I do that often. I talk about the quality of the workforce that we have. Every chance I get when I see an employee did something particularly good, I personally call them and tell them, because that telegraphs throughout the organization. And as you know, sir, from your private sector experience, once you turn the corner and things start to move in the right direction, it tends to multiply going forward. And that's really what I hope happens over the next several years.
I agree with that. And also, I'll just end with, again, it starts at the top with you and your leadership team. And you would agree with that, correct?
I would totally agree with that. Yes, sir. Thank you.
I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman from Massachusetts recognized Mr. Lynch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the ranking member for holding this hearing. I have a couple of unanimous consent requests to enter into the record a letter from the American Federation of Government Employees.
Without objection.
Thank you. Welcome, Administrator Peskoski. We really appreciate you coming here to help the committee with its work. We have had a choppy relationship on this committee with TSA in the past, and that has been because of a lack of cooperation in our requests for documents and testimony in some cases. I will say that it is bipartisan non-cooperation from your standpoint. You have refused to give the Democrats and the Republicans helpful information. So I'm just asking you to try to change that as well when you change the culture there at TSA. In the past, John Roth, who was the Inspector General for TSA, a great American in our opinion, wonderful public servant, did wonderful work. He had red teams going out there, and you know, red teams, they would strap weapons on their legs and go through the screening stations, and it was his work that disclosed that we had like an 80% or 84% failure rate going through screening. So I'm hoping that acting Inspector General John Kelly, who I understand is also very good, will continue to test our defenses and our security at those stations, and hopefully our success rate will climb. We've got some outstanding issues. One, we've got this so-called Quiet Skies program where air marshals were reportedly surveilling the general public. So this is not the case where, in the usual context, air marshals will be placed on planes when we know that someone who is on the no-fly list or someone who is a suspect is going to travel. This is a case where the general public is surveilled and there is no probable cause to do so. So that doesn't really fly with me in terms of what our air marshals should be doing. So I don't know how much you can say in this setting, but we need to re-engineer that program so that we comply with the constitutional rights that Americans have, right?
Yes, sir. If I could address both parts of your comments,
great,
please. Yeah. First, on covert testing, I agreed. Inspector General Roth was a great partner to work with, and he helped TSA out a lot. And you can imagine being in my position when those covert test results are revealed.
I'm only giving you a minute now, so when we get down to 1 minute, I'm taking my time back.
Okay, got it. So anyway, we took his results and we took action on them. And if you look at all of the procurements we have going on right now, it's to bring the technology that both his testing and my own testing revealed. With respect to Quiet Skies is a risk-based program. It doesn't surveil the general public. It surveils and puts air marshals on flights of people that we think present more risk in flight. It's a risk-based program consistent with all the law and direction that we've received from the Congress. Importantly, it is not a new program either. Quiet Skies has been around since 2012. The privacy impact statements have been published, and you know, that information is out there available to the public to see. But to me, it's a very beneficial, intelligence-driven, risk-based program that results in better utilization of the Federal Air Marshal Service.
Okay. Well, maybe we need to talk about that in a different setting, in a secure setting then. The other piece that you're responsible for, you are the lead agency on pipeline infrastructure security. And in Massachusetts, we just had a horror show up in Andover, in North Andover, and Lawrence, where we had, I think, upwards of 70 homes explode because the gas company there, Columbia Gas, had put something in order of 10 times the gas pressure through those lines, went right through all the checks and balances that we have in that system, and caused major damage and at least one fatality. Now, I know that you've just issued guidelines on pipeline safety. I also have been fighting in my own district in West Roxbury and in Weymouth, a couple of pipelines that are going in there in very thickly settled residential areas, high-pressure gas lines. In one case, the gas line goes through a rock quarry that is blasting, you can't make this stuff up, going through an active blasting area, and I can't get them to relocate that high pressure pipeline out of that quarry, which is right next to a residential area in my district. Look, I've tried everything. We've gone to court, and I still can't beat the gas companies. What are you doing in light of the dangers that we've now seen happening? Is there any interest or initiative to take a closer look at the pipeline security guidelines that you've issued?
Sir, the pipeline security guidelines were just recently published, and actually they're quite up to date and represent a really good effort.
They were before these explosions, though.
That's right, but the explosion really is a safety, not a security issue, as I understand it. It was an overpressurization by
What's the difference?
Well, security would mean
and
you have an actor who's trying to disrupt the system and cause a lot of harm to a lot of people. A safety issue is a misuse of a procedure that creates a safety situation that can also result in injuries to folks, but it's not by an actor. And we work very closely with our Department of Transportation agencies in that regard. They have safety responsibility. We have security responsibility.
Well, I don't care who blows up my neighbor's house.
Right.
If it's a terrorist or it's the gas company, it's a problem.
I agree with that.
So we need to eliminate the vulnerability in the system that allows that to happen, whether it's stupidity or nefarious intent that blows up the house. It doesn't really matter. We need to secure the system and make sure that there's some countermeasures and safeguards against either actor. Is what I'm saying. So I think we ought to take another look at that. And I know, Mr. Chairman, you've been very indulgent, and I appreciate that. You haven't cut me off, so I'll yield back the time that I don't have.
Yes, and Mr. Litch, I would like to come chat with you about Quiet Skies. I would enjoy that opportunity. Thanks. Thanks.
The gentlelady from New Jersey is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Prokosky, for being here. As always, I am impressed with the kind of commitment you've made to try to make this agency more respectful of its employees. I still think we need to talk about some structural deficiencies as it relates to whether or not there should be a Title V coverage of your employees, but you've made progress, and I think that that's notable. I want to just talk to you about something else, though. I understand that you're considering organizational changes to the TSA that would majorly scale back the duties of the TSA's international office, the Office of Global Strategies, by assigning many of its duties to other offices. Given the grave threats to aviation emanating from overseas, cohesive international security efforts are as important as ever. And so I'm wondering, what is the impetus for these changes?
Yes, ma'am, thank you for your comment. And if anything, I want to put more emphasis on international engagement. We've done a lot of work in TSA over the past year to raise the global bar on aviation security. I just came back on Monday from a meeting with ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization. I just had a town hall yesterday where I told all of my employees that I want to put more TSA men and women in significant positions internationally because they can help us.
Okay, then perhaps what I need to ask you is that before you engage in a restructuring, would you have a conversation with Congress about how that does indeed enhance the international oversight that we're concerned about?
Yes, ma'am. I'd be happy to meet with you or whatever group you would like to convene.
Great, because it just seems to me that perhaps we're misreading what it means by taking this agency, this office, and dispersing some of its employees and resources elsewhere. I also have a question to ask you regarding the long-awaited solicitation for the CT machines. We've all been just waiting so much for this. But I was sort of disappointed to hear that you all are considering a single vendor. I'm very concerned about a single vendor for a number of reasons. Number one, I think that it could possibly eliminate or reduce the innovations that come from competition. Number two, it sets somebody up to be the big dog that we're dealing with, and that reduces competition and also might reduce innovation. And number three, I think it has a negative impact on minorities and women who are in that field and are working very hard, but just don't have the kind of resources to be the big dog that we're considering. So tell me, you know, you're thinking about this. I know we're anxious to get these machines out. I know. But still in all, this short-term gain may have long-term implications, and I want to know what your response would be to that.
Yes, ma'am. Thanks for the question. The initial solicitation, the RFP, was just released a couple of weeks ago, and it closes a couple weeks from now. We have 5 vendors, four very active, involved in the competition. The RFP says that we intend to select one, but reserve the option to select additional vendors for the award. But the important thing to keep in mind with this is just the first procurement. This is using the FY19 funds that has received great support from the Congress. Roughly 200 CT machines. We need to replace 2,000, and this is for the existing standard made better rather than the entirely new standard. So my point is that the much larger procurements are in the out years, not in fiscal 19.
Okay, so I'm going to watch it closely. I hope I get reelected so that I can.
Okay.
But I want to hold you. I want to hold you accountable that we are going to increase the diversity of vendors, particularly women and minorities who just don't get a chance to work in this field, and also that we can ensure that there is a kind of innovation because things are changing so quickly. As soon as we figure it out, they figured it out, and we've got to figure it out differently. I know you're committed to that in a sort of a holistic way. I would like for you to make sure that your organization drills down and understands that you're committed to diversity and competition here. Thank you very much, and with that, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentlelady from New York is recognized, Ms. Maloney.
To your testimony today. As a part of good news, 2 weeks ago, 3 TSA employees received the Office of Special Counsel's Public Servants of the Year Award. And there is a photo of them up there, a photo of Charlene Mata, Heather Callahan, Chuck and Michael Abro, and they reported security concerns at the airport where they worked. But rather than addressing their concerns, senior managers at TSA retaliated against these employees. They moved them to a new duty station at different airports. They forced them to move their families hundreds of miles away. But these whistleblowers fought this retaliation, and TSA ended up paying them $1 million as part of a settlement agreement. That money came from the United States taxpayers, and those were tax dollars. So my question, Admiral, is I'm sure you agree that the American taxpayers should not have to pay $1 million because senior TSA managers retaliated against employees reporting security concerns. Is that right?
Well, the other part of it, ma'am, is that you know, when we make a decision as to whether to engage in settlement negotiations, we also consider the cost of litigation on the part of the government, and that is a factor. Is if the cost of litigation would cost us close to that amount or more, it might make more sense to settle the case. I'm not saying that was at play in this case necessarily, but that is also a factor when we look at settlement negotiations. I would say too that when we appreciate what each one of the 3 of them contributed to TSA based on what the information they provided, and additionally the involuntary directed reassignments we don't do anymore based on this.
Well, another approach is not to retaliate against people who are trying to make airlines more safe. I would say you should be giving them an award if they're trying to make it have a legitimate concern about safety. After 9/11, creating TSA was a prime goal of this Congress, and there are good men and women working there, and the security can save lives. But these funds, you know, if you hadn't gotten into the fights with them, these funds could have been used to increase airport security or even address the security deficiencies that these employees warned about. But there was a bigger problem. These employees filed whistleblower retaliation claims with the Office of Special Counsel, which is the federal office that handles these issues. But TSA refused to provide documents to the Office of Special Counsel about the case, so we actually had to pass a law. Now, that's an extreme, when you have to pass a law to force TSA to turn over those documents. And it was after the Office of Special Counsel got those documents, after they saw this retaliation, that TSA agreed to settle the case for $1 million. The problem is that even now, TSA is withholding these very same documents from this committee. We issued a subpoena for them 1.5 years ago, but the agency will not turn them over. So, Admiral, why is TSA defying this committee's bipartisan subpoena? What is the legal basis?
Ms. Mullally, first and foremost, we don't tolerate whistleblower retaliation. That's been my stance since I've been the administrator.
But this happened?
That happened before I got into TSA, and I'm not saying I'm the magic wand that's going to fix all those problems, but I want people to know that that is not acceptable, and I'll take action when those cases occur, if they do. Additionally, in my opening statement, I said that, hey, I'm responsible for good stewardship of public funds, and I would prefer not to spend $1 million. I agree with you 100%.
But Sir Admiral, my question is, right now, you can hand these documents over. We have a subpoena for the documents. TSA is not handing the documents over. Now, I know the members of this committee, if you don't hand them over, they'll pass a bill forcing you to hand them over. They're not going to stop. So why are you not handing these documents over? They have a subpoena, a legitimate subpoena.
Yes, ma'am, and I appreciate your concern. I am following executive branch guidance in that regard. So that is, I will do everything I can to provide information to this committee. I believe very strongly in your oversight function, but I have limitations within the executive branch as to what I will provide.
No. The subpoena is not to the executive branch. The subpoena is to you. It's to you.
Right, and I have not been subpoenaed. And
but
I hope
to TSA.
Right, and I hope not to be. I will continue to follow the guidance that the executive branch provides.
But the executive branch and President Trump has not asserted any executive privilege, and not executive privilege, no deliberative privilege, nothing. So they're not holding you up. They're not holding you up. And this was issued to TSA, and not the President, not the executive branch, not DHS. That means that you, as the administrator, have the ultimate obligation to comply with it.
I understand all that. I am not an attorney. I'm not going to wade into all the legal issues that are involved here. I will follow the guidance that the Department of Homeland Security provides.
Okay, well, you have two choices according to the law. Either produce the documents that have been subpoenaed, or produce a letter showing that President Trump has formally put forward executive privilege over them. That's it. So my question is, will TSA produce the documents that this committee subpoenaed more than a year ago relating to the claims of those whistleblowers who were clearly wronged?
And I repeat my answer. I will follow the guidance that the executive branch and the Department of Homeland Security provide me. And
but the subpoena went to you. There is no guidance from DHS, and I doubt the President even knows about this. And he hasn't exerted executive privilege. The paper is on your desk. Are you going to produce these documents to the committee or not?
I haven't seen the paper.
Well, this is the most. This is very annoying to me. So how are we going to handle this? We will make sure that the papers are on your desk tomorrow morning. Can you get back to the chairman with whether or not you're going to comply with the subpoena?
The answer remains the same that I've just provided. I will follow the guidance of the department in this regard.
Excuse me, there is no guidance from the Department of Homeland Security.
I received
There's none. There's none from President Trump. There's nothing from the executive. You can't say, I'm going to follow their guidance. They're not giving you any guidance. They probably don't even know anything about it. It's on your desk. Are you going to comply with a government subpoena or not?
I assure you, ma'am, that the department is aware of the issue. And again, this is not my decision. This is a decision for my superiors in the Department of Homeland Security, and I will respect the decision.
No. We didn't subpoena Homeland Security. We subpoenaed TSA. We subpoenaed TSA. Now, do we have to have another hearing where you come back and say, I talked to everybody, including the President of the United States, and they aren't doing executive privilege, so now I'm going to hand over the documents? I mean, this is talk around. This is why people hate bureaucracy and why they hate government. We subpoenaed. Do you know how hard it is to get a subpoena from the chairman? It was agreed to in this committee. We have asked for the information, and you are denying the information for legitimate oversight, which is the job of this committee.
My understanding is that we have provided every accommodation we can.
You provided no accommodation.
Yes, we did.
There's no way you can accommodate anything. You let us photograph something.
That's right.
But that's not what we asked for. We want the documents.
Yeah, we have worked.
You have not accommodated. We didn't ask for a photograph. We asked for the documents.
Right.
And we have a subpoena, not for a photograph. We have a subpoena for the documents. And this is the national security of our country. And let me tell you, your whole office was created by this Congress. And there was a whole effort not to create it, not to, or to contract it out. But we said if police are protecting us, TSA should have the same standing. And it was a huge fight. And now the body that created you is now asking for some common sense oversight, and you're denying us. And I find it outrageous and disrespectful, and you are running around the bush saying a lot of gobbledygook instead of coming forward with it's just a simple subpoena for some documents. In fact, I find your response so shocking because I don't understand why you would not comply with it. And then, I have another question here real quick. I understand that we may hold a vote at tomorrow's business meeting on this matter, and I plan to support measures to obtain these documents. And my final question is, will TSA produce the documents that this committee subpoenaed more than a year ago relating to the claims of these whistleblowers who were clearly wronged? It's the question I asked earlier. Are you going to produce them or not?
The gentlelady's out of time, but you may answer her question.
I've been out of time for about 10 minutes, but I was trying to pin him down.
I had noticed it also.
I tried to get an answer from him, and I have not gotten an answer.
That's why I had a very slow trigger finger. You may answer the question.
Ma'am, I will do everything I can to accommodate the committee's requests. We did provide screen side-by-sides, not a camera shot, but a screen side-by-side of redacted, non-redacted documents. We have also agreed to provide paper copies in our headquarters for committee staff to go over the documents. And
respectfully, that's not what we asked for. We will be holding another vote on this tomorrow.
Okay.
I yield back.
The gentleman from New York, North Carolina, is recognized.
We're all a little.
They're both states and they're close by. North Carolina.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And once again, you have continued to prove your more than fairness in that chair since you have taken over.
I'm going to say it publicly. I'm going to miss him. I really am. I'm sorry that he's retiring and leaving. I think he's been a great member of Congress.
Well, I think what she was saying without the microphone was that she was going to miss Trey Gowdy, so make sure that is on the record there, okay? All right. Administrator Prokowski, let's get back to the matter at hand. The committee did find numerous instances of senior TSA managers sexually harassing female employees with varying degrees of punishment. So let me just start with a broad question. Do you believe the TSA has a sexual harassment problem?
I believe we have employees that have violated our sexual harassment guidelines, and those employees should be held accountable.
Well, I agree, but I think that answer to the question would, if there is an issue, that overall it would be yes, and obviously with a little over a year that you've been there,
yes,
just barely, and from what we see, Administrator, we do believe you're making great strides to that. But to say in the past the TSA has had a sexual harassment problem, I think is a fair assessment. Is that? Would you agree?
I would say yes. That's an issue for us, and we are aggressively addressing it.
Okay. This past November, TSA removed an assistant federal security director after he was found to have engaged in sexual harassment, actually made both sexist and racist remarks. His victim said he had been sexually harassing since 2010 and made inappropriate comments in the presence of other officials, including the airport's federal security director. Is it acceptable for a pattern harassment to go unchecked for years in that case?
Totally unacceptable.
And do you think the known whistleblower retaliation contributed to the victim not coming forward?
Perhaps did, and that's really why I place such an emphasis on that. I want people to come forward, otherwise we'll never address the problem.
Yeah, you understand that the security and the safety and the protection, if you're going to root out a problem, these folks have to have the assurance that from the top down, from the administrator down, that the retaliation has to cease and desist immediately. Is that a fair statement?
That's a fair statement, and I've done everything I can as the administrator to provide that assurance to our employees. We just need to continue to keep that message going, and our actions are going to speak louder than words.
Well, you answered my question, because I was going to ask you, how do you detect and prevent sexual harassment at TSA, including allowing victims to come forward with their claim or claims? Are there specific things, or is it just a culture you're trying to change? What are you trying to do there?
Yes, sir. Great question. At the end of the day, it's the culture I'm trying to change. That's what will address this issue most completely. And really, from my perspective, I don't think it should be just leader-based. In other words, when I leave this position, I want to leave a culture that was better than the culture I found.
You may be familiar with the OIG report on the TSA's handling of a 2015 disciplinary matter involving a TSES employee.
Yes.
The DHS OIG reviewed the disciplinary process that allowed an assistant administrator to stay at the agency after initially being recommended for termination. Specifically, the IG, the Inspector General, found TSA, and it quotes, TSA senior leaders deviated from standard policy and practice in a number of key respects, indicating that the TSES employee received unusually favorable treatment in the resolution of his disciplinary matter. Do you agree TSA's handling of these cases are acceptable?
Handling those cases, no, not acceptable.
Okay. And that is part of what you're saying here on record today, that you are committed to looking into this and changing the culture of what we've seen as despicable behavior in the past.
Yes, sir. Changing the culture, and then also putting written management directives in place so that the process is memorialized and followed.
It's very frustrating, to Ms. Maloney's point, of something that was created not too many years ago by the House, by Congress itself, and to see this kind of rampant behavior. In this situation we're talking about, even after the lady came forward, the perpetrator sent her another sexually explicit email, kind of putting, I mean, just really intimidating. So we want to make sure that this is a complete behavior change from here going forward.
Yes, sir, it is, and as I stated in my opening statement, the outcome of these cases would be different if they were before me.
Why, and I'm going to get off my script a little bit in my last 40 seconds. I want to know to you personally, why is it important to you personally, outside of the job description, that as the administrator of this organization, that this area is important to you as far as creating this kind of work environment?
Well, because it's fundamentally wrong to treat people this way, and one of the core values of TSA is respect. We have to have respect for each other, and I want to create a workplace environment that people look forward to come and to work every day, have high job satisfaction. I can't do it if people feel like they're being retaliated against. Additionally, it has a very negative effect on security, and my mission is to ensure the security of the transportation system. My focus is always going to be on our employees and doing whatever I can to make our employees' job better for them and their job satisfaction higher, and for them to look back at the senior leadership of TSA and say, okay, they get it, and they're supporting me, and they've added value to my ability to do the very important job I have.
Thank you for your remarks, Administrator. With that, I yield back to the Chairman.
Thanks.
Gentleman from Illinois is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Administrator, for coming in today. First of all, I understand that TSA performs just a vital role for our national security, so thank you to you and the men and women of the TSA for doing what you do every day. And I also think that the vast majority of your personnel try to do their job commendably. However, I am concerned about some of the issues that have been raised by my colleagues, and I'd like to bring up another issue. I represent the 8th Congressional District of Illinois. This is the district that is bordering on the west and northwest borders of O'Hare International Airport. I happen to have the runways but not the terminal in my district. However, what happens at the terminal affects a lot of my constituents. One of the things that I have heard repeatedly from my constituents, especially Muslim American constituents, is a real concern about bias in the way that they are screened. And it doesn't just include Muslim Americans, it includes people of South Asian heritage. And I want to hear from you whether you have heard these concerns as well. What are you doing about this? Because this is very serious and it seems to be protracted. I've heard this now for years. And I'd like to hear also, after you finish, about a specific incident that a lot of people are discussing. So go ahead.
Yes, sir. Thanks for the question. Thanks for your comments about the workforce. I would tell you that, yes, I've heard those comments before as well. And what we have done as an agency is actively engaged with community groups around the country to make sure that we understand their perspective, feedback that perspective to our workforce, and train our workforce on how they might come across at times, however unintentional perhaps. Additionally, as I travel around the country visiting airports, where I do find communities of Muslim Americans, for example, I make an effort to reach out to those communities so that I can personally engage with them to understand their perspective. We also, from TSA headquarters, every year have a multicultural day where we bring in representatives from across the spectrum of the cultures of the United States, and we have a discussion with them. I was able to have a good conversation with folks that were in attendance just about 2 months ago. Very good gathering, and the feedback that I got from the attendees there, because I spent some time to walk around and chat as much as I could individually with them, was they appreciated actually the progress that TSA has made over the course of time. And final thing I'll say, sir, because I don't want to consume too much time, is that we do provide very quick website access for any issues that any passenger might have with what they could expect at TSA, and importantly, to provide us feedback on their experience.
I understand. I'm glad that you are concerned about this as I am, but I think that we need to see more action on this front, because I'm hearing persistent complaints about this. And specifically, this was actually brought to my attention by my wife the other day, and it happened just recently, where a Muslim American woman says that TSA basically strip searched her and forced her to show her a pad. In a complaint filed by the ACLU, 27-year-old Zainab Merchant said that TSA agents subjected her to a 2-year program of enhanced, intrusive, and humiliating security checks at airports around the United States simply for being a Muslim American. This appeared in the Washington Post and then in other outlets as well. And this really bothers me a lot. This bothers me to no end, because, we cannot, in 2018, be discriminating against people based on their religion or their ethnicity or the color of their skin or any other feature. And I hear from business people routinely that now they have to allot, I'm talking about Muslim American business people who are traveling through O'Hare constantly all over the place, that they have to allocate an additional 2-3 hours to make sure that they can get through TSA, even when they have TSA pre-check sometimes. And they've just come to accept it. And to me, that's not acceptable. So I need to have a commitment from you to work with my office to investigate these things and to try to do something about it, because it's getting out of hand. And it's not just Muslim Americans. It's people who are not, they're just of a different heritage than the mainstream.
Yes, sir, I agree with you 100%. What I would offer is that I would like to come out, and if you could, or your staff could arrange an engagement for me with those communities, I'd be most happy to do that, because I want to hear their perspectives. Our policy is we absolutely do not discriminate. If somebody has to plan 3 hours routinely to get through the security checkpoint, there's an issue there, and I want to understand it.
Yeah, the worst part is some of them have just kind of resigned themselves to this.
Yeah, they shouldn't.
And they're not complaining anymore, because it's like, oh, well, right. That's the way it is. And I find that unacceptable. So I'm glad that you're willing to work with us, and we'll follow up. And we got to root this out. If as I believe there is some bias here, we got to root it out, because that's not good for our community, our country, or national security at the end of the day.
Yes, sir, and I appreciate your help.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Admiral, I'm last, so thank you for your patience. I'll get the bad part out of the way first. Yesterday, DHS managed to do something that really I wasn't even sure God could do in this political environment, which is unite Republicans and Democrats. So proportionality is important. Protecting witnesses is important. You know, each of the members on both sides, we've got friends on appropriations on both sides of the aisle, and I understand privilege probably, I guess, maybe as well as anybody in the House. But we're not going to go away, so to the extent you can deliver that message back, and I realize that you're not making the decision, somebody else is, but Congress becomes very apolitical and bipartisan when documents we believe we're entitled to are withheld for a long period of time with a dearth of legal justification. So if you can help us communicate that, I realize you're not the decision makers. I'm not going to beat you up over it, but if you can help us deliver that message, I don't know who will be sitting here. I know it will not be me, but somebody will be sitting here in January, and I don't think the issue's going to go away. So with that, a couple of things I want to ask you about. I want to ask you about equipment at your security checkpoints, what you need, do you have it, are you excited about what's coming? And I realize, given the setting we're in now, there may be things you could discuss in another setting, but what can you tell us from an equipment standpoint that would help you?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thanks for the question. And we're in the very beginning stages of a massive technology refresh at our security checkpoints. And it's basically the result of the covert testing results that we saw that indicated that the equipment that we had was not up to the task that was in front of us. And so we have started with replacing the X-ray machines at our security checkpoints for carry-on bags. And the technology is the CT or CAT scan technology, which is not just a little bit better, but a lot better than the current technology we have in place. And additionally, and very important to me, is that it provides an interface for our employees that is, again, much, much better than what we have in place. Rather than a two-dimensional image and trying to discern what's in somebody's carry-on bags in 2D, the CT machines give you a three-dimensional image, which will mean for us it's better security, and for passengers it's going to be much more convenient for them, because already where those CT machines are deployed, passengers don't have to take laptops out of their carry-on bags. Ultimately, they won't have to take out anything from the carry-on bags, because we'll be able to see that. The next thing that we're looking at our security checkpoints is a way to get better at identity verification and risk management for passengers that come through the checkpoint. We're trying very hard to ensure that, to the extent we have information that we can use to identify risk by passenger. For example, the risk in a pre-check lane passenger is by definition less, because a pre-check passenger is given more information to the government, as provided their biometric to the government, and therefore we recognize that we have more knowledge of that person's background and provide them a different level of screening than a passenger who didn't provide that information. And so this new technology will allow us to, one, better validate that the driver's license you provide or the passport you provide is in fact authentic. So rather than the officer looking down and just examining visually the credential, the machine will verify the authenticity of the credential. Additionally, the machines are connected to our secure flight database, which basically allows us to see what the risk of that passenger is, pre-check, standard lane, or perhaps a selectee, and also gives us the flight information for that passenger. So for passengers, once this technology is fully deployed, they won't have to display a boarding pass, because we do have cases nearly every single month where we have a fraudulent ID or a fraudulent boarding pass presented at the checkpoint. And then finally, from a technology perspective, sir, we're working to improve the on-body alarm system that we have, where you walk through and you put your hands over your head. There's updates to that technology and then different technologies that we're examining. So my hope is that over the next 5 years, passengers will see an entirely different suite of technology, And importantly, our adversaries will recognize that our detectability is continuing to improve. The one thing that I will add is that we have deployed more and more canine teams at our security checkpoints. Canines are very effective at detection, very effective deterrence value as well. And thanks to the support of the Congress, both the House and the Senate, again, a very bipartisan issue is a stronger support for our canine programs in terms of numbers. And so I expect we have both House and Senate marks in our fiscal 19 appropriation bill that increases the number of teams by 50, which is a very good and significant add, and I appreciate that support.
Well, I appreciate you bringing up canines. I was going to ask you about them in honor of our former chairman, Jason Chaffetz, who never missed an opportunity to advocate for them. So in honor of him, thank you for addressing that. Your term of service, like the FBI director is there for 10 years. I guess Mick Mulvaney's an at-will employee. What are the terms of your service? Do you have a time period that you are nominated and confirmed to serve?
No, sir. I serve at the pleasure of the President, but there is legislation that is before the floor of the House, I believe this afternoon, that includes a provision to make the Administrator of TSA a 5-year term, and it also makes that retroactive to my start of office. I 100% support that. As we've seen and we've talked about over the course of this afternoon, we do need to continue to improve the culture in TSA. We do need to make continued sustained improvements in the agency. I think it's a terrific agency as it sits right now. It can be much better, and having a longer period of time to be able to put those changes in place, I think, is very valuable. I'm the 7th confirmed administrator for TSA, but over the course of time and in the course of your investigation, you saw a number of acting officials that were in place. And this is not a criticism of those acting officials. It's just that when you come in and you're only there for a short period of time and not necessarily familiar with TSA, it does make the decision process a little bit more challenging. So I think it's very important to provide the TSA administrator a 5-year term. I 100% support that, and I hope you'll vote in the affirmative on that.
My friend from Maryland made a reference to air marshals in his opening statement. What update can you give us on the efficacy of that program? From time to time, I bump into them in travels. Personally speaking, I find it very reassuring to know that they're on airplanes, but I'm not an expert in whether or not that's where the trends are going in the future. What's your position on that, and how are they being used now?
Yes, sir. Thanks for that question. I think the Federal Air Marshal Service is an outstanding component of TSA. They provide all of our in-flight security and also provide landside security in the form of the VIPER teams, the Visible Intermodal Protection and Response teams that you may see at a transportation hub like Washington Metro, for example, or Amtrak, supporting state and local and industry enforcement mechanisms. But with respect to the Federal Air Marshal Service, in-flight security is still very important. And one of the strengths of the TSA system are the multiple elements of security we have. And so when a passenger starts out and they buy a ticket, our security process starts in terms of our vetting of that passenger. And then there are several layers, including canines, that a passenger encounters in their course of proceeding to the gate of an aircraft. But the air marshals provide our in-flight security. And even though we've had advancements in reinforced cockpit doors, and we do have a very effective, I think, and very beneficial Federal Flight Deck Officer program where first officers and pilots volunteer their time to be trained by TSA to handle weapons, to protect a cockpit, and are in fact deputized by us when they're on board an aircraft. Even though we have those two mitigations in place, the risk in flight is still there. Of course, I look at the intelligence every single day, and that indicates to me that we still very much need to have a Federal Air Marshal Service in place. And so what I have done since I've been the administrator is really looked at how we deploy our Federal Air Marshals and have published a new concept of operations that deploys Federal Air Marshals primarily on flights where we think the most risk is represented by the people on board those flights. And in my view, that's a better risk mitigation process and also allows us to use all the tools that have been developed by TSA over time to ensure that we can assess risk by passenger. And I'm really very happy with the performance of the Federal Air Marshal Service. I would tell you, sir, that sometimes people think that being a Federal Air Marshal is an easier job. It is not. it's a very difficult job to do. Air marshals have significant challenges, and one of the things that I've done in this regard is to look at the fatigue of just flying all day long, and particularly when you're on a domestic flight where you're doing maybe 3 flights a day where you're going up and down. That can be very fatiguing if you do it 3, 4, 5 days in a row. And so we backed off some of our pace to ensure that we address the fatigue issues that many air marshals highlighted for me when I either talked to them just before or just after a flight, or talk to them at their field offices. But bottom line for me is it's a very, very important layer of TSA security. I really appreciate the professionalism of our Federal Air Marshal Service, and I'm doing everything I can to ensure we take a more risk-based approach to how we deploy our resources.
Well, Admiral, I'm out of time. We're all kind of creatures of our own personal experience, and I don't pretend that it's anybody else's, but I fly a lot, and I don't wear a member pin. So I guess I would maybe possibly understand my colleagues to think that that impacts how TSA employees treat them. I don't wear one, so unless they watch really old episodes of Forensic Files, my guess is they have no idea who I am, and I have never been treated anything other than professionally. All the airports I've been at, particularly, obviously, Charlotte and Greenville and DCA the most, but never had a negative experience in the 8 years that I've been flying on an almost weekly basis. So that doesn't mean other people haven't. I'm sure they have, but they've been great. Appreciate all the service you've given our country and all the different ways that you've done it. And I am sure that you will agree with me as you try to kind of change the culture and take the agency in a different direction. The employees have got to have confidence that there's just one set of rules. There's not 2 different sets of rules depending on whether or not you know the right people. And that report was hard for me to read. I'm glad the folks did it. I read every word of it. That's not what I think of when I think of folks in leadership positions in public service. So all the best to you as you try to sort that out, and appreciate your service, and thank you for being here today.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it.
With that, we are adjourned.